Welcome to the REBT Advocates with Dr. Michael R. Adelstein and Tommy Bateman. If you have any questions, please email us at rebtadvocates@gmail.com and please subscribe to the channel. Michael, today we're going to be talking about toxic words, words that are psychopathological in their nature when we hold them into our belief system. Can you help me explain to the audience what psychopathological means?
Yeah, well, psychopathological just means words and concepts that cause emotional disturbance because, as we know, it's our thinking, ideas in our head that cause our emotional and behavioral problems, not situations themselves. So, and our thinking is usually represented by words. So these are the words and concepts that cause emotional problems. And just as a caveat, it's really not the word itself, but it's the concept and meaning that the word represents that's the problem. So you could say the right words all day, but if underneath it you still have these psychopathological ideas, these ideas that cause emotional disturbance, then that's not going to help. So this is really deep, short-term therapy, and that is we help you change the concepts and change the words that go along with it.
And one of the things all psychopathological or toxic words have in common are that essentially at their basis there's no evidence to them, or that they're untrue, or there's really no logical way of measuring these toxic words. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, yes. They're untrue, they're illogical, and they lead to poor results.
And and just to be clear too, and a lot of times we're not going to necessarily attack these psychopathological words unless there is a problem. There is some sort of emotional disturbance you want to work on, and then we're going to find these toxic words in our thinking patterns and eliminate them.
That's a very good point. And we'll illustrate when we get to the specific words. But we start with a goal. Your goal, first establish your goal. Is it to get over anger, or maybe you're happy with your anger? You think it works or it feels good. So if you want to be angry, then leave your anger creating concepts and words alone and go on to something that bothers you and you see interferes with your long-term major goals.
And so in that way, we're being pretty morally neutral when it comes to, or morally not saying anything about the nature of the words. Is it getting in the way of your goal? If so, this is a practical way of handling it.
Exactly. When we work with clients, we start with their goals. And so that's the moral neutrality. We help them achieve what they would like to achieve if emotional or behavioral disturbance is blocking it. And we work from there.
Very good. So let's attack one of these words we have. The first type of thought, toxic word we wanted to address today was these demanding words: must, should, have to, got to. Why are these psychopathological?
Well, they have certain uh, characteristics in common with all toxic meanings and thoughts, and that is they tend to be absolutistic rather than relative to your goals and to advantages and disadvantages. And there's normally no empirical referent for it. There's never any evidence for a toxic must or should or have to or supposed to. And the main reason is you don't run the universe, so you can't make happen what you think must happen. So there's no way to do that. So it doesn't, it's a fiction, and it leads to poor results. And all these ideas lead to global evaluations. Either I'm no good, you're no good, or life is no good.
Absolutely. And for example, we can say, I must do well when I'm speaking on this YouTube or podcast right now. I must do well, or else I'm no good. Well, where's it written in stone that I must do well in the first place? Is there some sort of cosmic law demanding that I do well and then the fact that I don't do well means I am no good. The must there is obviously fallacious. It's false because the fact of the matter is sometimes I don't do well. It's happened in my past, so there is no logical reason why I must do well now or in the future. I would prefer to, most certainly, but there's no evidence for it. Um, that's kind of the reason why we expose the word must for the irrational thought that it is. Now, one of the things I think I want to hit on is, let's say if the must is placed after like an if statement. If you want water from hydrogen, you must add oxygen. That's not a false statement, but that doesn't lead to psychopathological reactions either.
It does. It normally wouldn't,
Yeah,
but it could if by must you mean it absolutely has to be work this way, and if it's the end of the world, it doesn't. So
yeah,
if you're a scientist and you have an ego investment in the experiment working out, and then you say it must work out, and you're anxious about it working out or depressed afterwards when it doesn't work out, then it is a psychopathological must. But I think what you mean, Tommy, is that in many cases, you people use must or should in a preferential sense
mm-hmm.
or a predictive sense. In the case of the experiment, you mentioned it's probably a predictive must. It must work out in the sense that this is the way atoms and molecules work.
Yes, yeah. And of course, but then we get to the other side of the equation where we say, I must have the love of my friends and family. Again, that's a toxic use of the word must. That would most certainly lead to negative emotional consequences, depression, anxiety, self pity, when you don't get the love and esteem that you wanted from others that you couldn't demand from them to begin with.
Yes, and a few minutes ago, Tommy, you mentioned I prefer it, and therefore it must occur.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important point, that our demands and absolutistic kinds of thinking normally start from a reasonable idea. As you mentioned, in
Mm-hmm.
this case, I prefer to have the love of my family. And being imperfect humans, you escalate that preference into a must, a dire necessity, and then you get anxious about what was originally a practical problem. What could I do to get along with my family better or get their approval?
Yes, and why is I prefer reasonable compared to I must? Well, that's because I have evidence for the preference. That being my own thought, I do prefer. Oh yeah, I do prefer to get the love of my family. That's true, but I must. We have no evidence for that. Um,
Yes, and to detail that a little more, the evidence starts with your goal. Your goal is to get the love of your family,
mm-hmm.
and then as a preference means that if you get what you prefer, you have advantages, and if you don't get what you prefer, you have disadvantages. So the evidence is if you don't have the love of your family, you get more disadvantages.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to speak to you, or they don't help you out in difficult situations or things like that. So there are disadvantages, and that's the evidence. But they start with a subjective goal that you decide on. No one can tell you what your goal should be, or they can, but they may be wrong.
Exactly. I think that well covers it. How about this phrase? I can't stand it.
Yes, again, there's a grain of truth in there. When people say, I can't stand it, what they normally mean is, I can't stand it as well as I think I should.
Mm-hmm.
And then because of the should in there, they overgeneralize to, I can't stand it at all. And again, as with the musts and shoulds, there's no evidence you can stand what you're standing. Obviously, it hasn't killed you, so you're standing it.
Yep.
And the more it doesn't work, because the more you convince yourself, I can't stand it, I can't stand it, the more upset you get, and the more difficult it becomes to stand it.
And I think that's a point of a lot of we can use military training. They get put through, or the Navy SEAL Hell Week. They get put through some of the most rigorous and tough training out there to disabuse themselves of the thought that they can't stand something. And it's giving them direct evidence. Oh, actually, I can deal with this. I'm still alive. There's a lot more I can stand, and they're giving them direct evidence. When folks
Yes,
come to
and
you, go ahead.
Yeah, normally along those lines, normally you can use yourself as a role model in terms of direct evidence. You can remind yourself all the times in the past when
Exactly.
you were very uncomfortable, frustrated, displeased, and you survived, and you might have told yourself in advance, I can't stand it.
And that's exactly what I was about to say. Excellent. Yeah, the we have a treasure trove of evidence in our own memories showing that we can stand a whole lot. And even in the midst of something that is not pleasurable to you, you're still having evidence that you're able to stand it because you're still standing in the midst of this unpleasurable event. We have all the evidence in the world against the phrase "I can't stand it."
Yes, exactly. Another series of toxic words and concepts is the idea of something being awful,
Mm-hmm.
terrible, or horrible. So the grain of truth there is things could be bad or even very, very bad, 99.9% bad, but awful, terrible, and horrible normally means more than that, off the scale. Again, it's a fiction, like I can't
Mm-hmm.
stand it or I must get what I want. It's
Mm-hmm.
a fiction. There's nothing more than 99.9% bad. Nothing is 100% bad, which means no disadvantages at all, which is false. Everything, no advantages at all. Everything has certain advantages. If you're being tortured to death for 3 months, the advantage is they weren't torturing you to death for 6 months. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but awful means 100% bad, which doesn't exist, and then 101% bad off the chart of reality, and it shouldn't exist.
And very good. And one of the things I challenged a group of men today to tell me what is the definition of awful? What does it mean? And of course, they also said terrible, horrible, used the synonyms for it. But one of the things one guy said is the degree of badness. And I was like, that's interesting. That was a measure there. Now, I can measure Fahrenheit with a thermometer, I can measure weight with a scale, but I can't measure degree of badness. Um, and we could take the same event. I can step in the ring with Mike Tyson and get my face bashed in and go, I did not like that. That was awful without evidence and irrationally. But then somebody else can go in the same thing and get their face bashed in and say, that was a fun, amazing experience. I really enjoyed that. But it was the same thing. But I said it was awful, but and the other person didn't. What's the difference there besides their own subjective feeling?
Maybe they made $2 million for losing to Mike Tyson.
Maybe that's so. Maybe
Yeah.
there's more to the activating event than I thought.
Yes. In addition to demands, musts, and shoulds, and can't standards, and awful, terrible, and horrible, a fourth area of toxic thinking is global evaluations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm no good because you're not. I'm not doing what I think I must do. You're no good because you're not treating me the way I think you must treat me, and life is no good because it's unfair, it has hassles, and it's boring as it must not be.
Mm-hmm.
So again, uh, it's a it's a fiction to say someone is no good, that some of their actions are no good, but no matter what they do, they're still an imperfect human acting imperfectly, and life has its advantages and disadvantages, but it's never all bad.
And that's the thing. A global evaluation is you're doing something a human can't do. People get mad at and say, he doesn't know me. He doesn't know all I've been through. How can he judge me that way? And I would agree. Absolutely. He can't. He doesn't know everything about you, that other flawed human being. But when you say, but I'm a no good person, or I'm unlovable, I'm not worthy of anything. Well, if you're saying he can't do that to you, well, how are you going to do that to yourself? You don't even know everything about yourself either. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. How much less remember everything I've done in my life to create some sort of global evaluation? It would take omniscience, and that's not a human function.
Right, exactly. Not only omniscience, but psychic ability, because uh, you humans are a process. They're always changing.
Mm-hmm.
So you could do poorly today at something, say giving a talk, and well tomorrow. So are you a good person because you did well? You'll do well tomorrow, or a bad person because you did poorly today? We're always changing, but what's not changing is we're always imperfect people, fallible people who will continue to make mistakes for the rest of our life.
Very good. And Michael, I think these toxic words we can get more and more contrarian as we go along. I think REBT is a treasure trove for these types of concepts. So stay tuned because part 2 and part 3 of toxic words are coming, and we'll be able to really present some, I think, fantastic thoughts that REBT has to offer.
Thank you for the interesting topic, Tommy. And as usual, it was great to have spoken with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.